The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Maria Rodriguez unlocked the metal shutters of her small food cart on the corner of Elm Street and 3rd Avenue. The rhythmic clatter echoed through the still-sleeping neighborhood, a sound that had become as familiar to the locals as their morning alarm clocks. Maria had been running this modest operation for nearly 8 years now, serving tacos, empanadas, and her famous chicken soup to construction workers, office employees, and anyone else who appreciated honest, home-cooked food at fair prices. Her cart wasn't much to look at. The paint was chipped, one wheel squeaked persistently, and the canopy had been patched more times than she could count, but it was hers, paid for with years of savings from her previous job as a hotel housekeeper. The transition hadn't been easy. After her husband passed away suddenly from a heart attack, leaving her alone with mounting medical bills and no life insurance, Maria had needed to find a way to survive. Her daughter, Carmen, was studying nursing at the state university 2 hours away, and Maria was determined not to burden her with financial worries. So she'd taken the skills learned from her grandmother's kitchen in Puebla and transformed them into a livelihood. Every morning at 5 o'clock, she would prepare the day's offerings in her tiny apartment kitchen, loading everything carefully into coolers and containers before wheeling her cart to its designated spot. The work was exhausting, and her feet ached by day's end, but there was dignity in it. She wasn't asking for handouts. She was providing a service, feeding people who needed affordable, nutritious meals. The neighborhood had embraced her warmly, with regular customers stopping not just for food but for her bright smile and the kind word she always had ready. It was a Tuesday in late autumn when Maria first noticed the boy. She'd just finished serving the morning rush, a blur of hard hats and business suits, all in a hurry, when she spotted him lingering near the dumpster behind the Chinese restaurant next door. He couldn't have been more than 12 years old, rail-thin, with dark hair that hung in tangled clumps around his face. His clothes were several sizes too large, likely donated items, and even from a distance, Maria could see they hadn't been washed in quite some time. What struck her most, however, were his eyes. When he glanced in her direction, she saw something that made her heart constrict, not just hunger, but a deep, weary sadness that no child should possess. The boy caught her watching and immediately began to walk away, his shoulders hunched defensively. "Wait," Maria called out, surprising herself with the urgency in her voice. The boy froze but didn't turn around. "Are you hungry, Mijo?" she asked, softening her tone. She saw his shoulders tense, a visible internal debate playing out in his posture. Slowly, he turned to face her, suspicion and hope warring in his expression. Without waiting for an answer, Maria began preparing a plate, 2 chicken tacos, a generous portion of rice and beans, and a bottle of water. When she held it out to him, he approached cautiously, like a feral cat unsure whether to trust this offered kindness. He took the plate with trembling hands, mumbled something that might have been "thank you," and retreated to eat on the curb half a block away. Maria watched him devour the food with an intensity that spoke of days without a proper meal, and she made a decision right then. Whatever this boy's story was, however he'd ended up alone on these streets, she would make sure he had at least one good meal every day. The boy returned the next day, and the day after that, and soon his appearance became as regular as the morning sun. Maria learned that his name was Daniel, though extracting even that small piece of information had taken nearly a week of patient conversation. He was 13, not 12 as she'd initially guessed, but malnutrition had stunted his growth. His mother had died 2 years ago from an overdose, and his father, well, Daniel didn't like to talk about his father. He'd been in and out of foster homes, each placement worse than the last, until he'd finally run away 6 months ago. Now he survived on the streets, sleeping in abandoned buildings, avoiding the police and social workers who would send him back into a system he didn't trust. Maria's heart broke a little more with each detail he reluctantly shared. She began packing extra food specifically for him, always making sure he got the best portions. The other regulars noticed, of course. Some approved, others grumbled about, encouraging homeless people, but Maria paid the latter no mind. How could anyone look at a child in need and turn away? Mr. Peterson, who owned the hardware store down the block, started leaving his old jackets and sweaters with Maria to pass along to Daniel. Mrs. Kim from the Korean grocery brought protein bars and fruit. Even Tony, the gruff construction foreman who complained about everything, began adding an extra $1 to his payment with a gruff instruction to give the kid a cookie or something. Daniel remained wary of most people, but with Maria, he slowly began to relax. He started arriving earlier, helping her set up the cart before the morning rush. She would teach him simple tasks, how to arrange the condiments just so, how to prep ingredients efficiently, the importance of keeping everything clean. In return, he would tell her small things about his day, a funny dog he'd seen in the park, a book he'd found in a little free library, his dreams of someday becoming a mechanic because he liked figuring out how things worked. As winter approached, Maria's concern for Daniel intensified. The nights were growing colder, and she knew the abandoned building where he'd been sheltering would offer little protection against the harsh weather ahead. She tried several times to convince him to go to the youth shelter on Maple Street, but he adamantly refused. "They'll just call family services," he'd said, his jaw set stubbornly. "I'm not going back into the system."
I'm not.
Maria understood his fear, even if she didn't agree with his choice. The system that was supposed to protect children like Daniel had failed him repeatedly. Why should he trust it now? But she couldn't let him freeze to death on the streets either. She began asking around the neighborhood, discreetly inquiring whether anyone had a garage, a basement, any space that might offer better shelter. She even considered letting him sleep in her own apartment, but worried that could bring legal troubles down on both of them. Meanwhile, word of Maria's daily kindness toward Daniel had spread beyond their immediate block. A reporter from the local news website, Jenny Martinez, stopped by one morning during a slow period. She'd heard about the taco lady who feeds the homeless kid and wanted to do a human interest story. Maria was immediately suspicious. "I don't want publicity," she said firmly. "I'm just doing what any decent person would do." But Jenny was persistent and compassionate in her approach. "Ms. Rodriguez, stories like yours matter. They remind people that kindness still exists, that communities can rally around their vulnerable members. And honestly, if people read about Daniel's situation, maybe someone could offer real help, a proper place to stay, connections to resources he'd actually trust." Maria remained hesitant, but Daniel, who'd been listening from where he was wiping down the cart, surprised them both by speaking up. "Maybe she's right, Maria. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? At least if people know I exist, someone might remember if something bad happens to me." The resignation in his voice, the implication that he'd already accepted a potentially tragic fate, was what ultimately changed Maria's mind. Jenny's article appeared online 3 days later, accompanied by a photo she'd taken of Maria handing Daniel a steaming bowl of soup, both of them smiling genuinely at each other. The headline read, "The Roadside Angel, How One Woman's Kindness Feeds More Than Hunger." The piece was beautifully written, balancing Daniel's heartbreaking circumstances with Maria's matter-of-fact compassion. Jenny had interviewed several neighborhood regulars, capturing quotes that painted a picture of a community that cared but didn't quite know how to solve the larger problem of youth homelessness. Mr. Peterson had said, "Maria does what the rest of us should be doing. She sees a child in need and helps. No questions asked, no judgment." Mrs. Kim had contributed, "That boy, Daniel, he's not looking for pity. He just needs someone to believe he's worth caring about. Maria gives him that." The article ended with information about local youth services and a gentle reminder that countless children like Daniel fell through society's cracks every single day. Within 24 hours, the story had been shared thousands of times on social media. Within 48 hours, it had been picked up by regional news outlets. By the end of the week, it had gone truly viral, with shares and comments pouring in from across the country and even internationally. Maria's phone, which she'd reluctantly given Jenny for contact purposes, began ringing constantly with reporters requesting interviews, strangers offering donations, and advocacy groups wanting to feature her story in their campaigns. The attention was overwhelming and, frankly, unwelcome. Maria hadn't fed Daniel for recognition. She'd done it because he was a child who needed help. All this fuss made her uncomfortable. But Daniel seemed to handle it better than she did. "It's weird," he admitted one morning as they prepped the cart while a news van circled the block, "but at least people are talking about kids like me now. Maybe something good will come from it." Maria could only hope he was right. The donations started arriving within days of the story going viral. At first, it was just a few people stopping by the cart to press $20 or $50 into Maria's hand with instructions to buy the kid some warm clothes or get him whatever he needs. Maria kept meticulous track of every penny in a small notebook, determined to spend it all on Daniel and not a cent on herself. Then the offers became more substantial. A local church called to say they'd set up a fund in Daniel's name and had already collected over $3,000. A downtown law firm specializing in child advocacy reached out, offering pro bono legal services to help navigate Daniel's situation properly, finding a legal guardian, perhaps, or emancipation if that was appropriate, anything to keep him safe and out of an abusive system. A family therapist volunteered her services, understanding that Daniel would need professional support to process his trauma. Most surprising was the call from Thomas Blackwell, the owner of a successful chain of auto repair shops across the state. His secretary had seen the story and shared it with him, knowing that Mr. Blackwell had aged out of foster care himself as a teenager. "I was Daniel once," he told Maria in a gravelly voice that betrayed emotion. "I know exactly what that kid is going through. The fear, the anger, the feeling that nobody gives a damn whether you live or die. If he's interested in mechanics like your article said, I want to offer him an apprenticeship. Once he's 16, it could become proper employment. For now, we can set it up as an educational mentorship." Maria had been stunned speechless. Mr. Blackwell continued, "I'm not saying I can fix everything. God knows the system is broken, and one wealthy guy can't solve poverty and homelessness. But I can help one kid. That's what someone did for me 30 years ago, and I've been waiting for the right chance to pay it forward." When Maria shared these offers with Daniel, she watched emotions play across his face. Disbelief, hope, fear of disappointment. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why do all these people suddenly care?" Maria pulled him into a hug, something she'd started doing in recent weeks as he'd grown to trust her. "Because they always cared, me Joe. They just needed to know you existed." It was a crisp Monday morning in early December when everything changed. Maria had arrived at her usual corner at 5:30, the pre-dawn darkness lit only by scattered streetlights and the glow from the 24-hour convenience store across the street. Daniel had started sleeping in the storage room of Mr. Peterson's hardware store, a temporary arrangement that at least kept him warm and dry, while the legal advocates worked on finding a more permanent solution. He usually arrived around 6:15 to help with setup, and Maria had grown accustomed to his reliable presence, finding comfort in their quiet morning routine. She was in the middle of arranging the day's ingredients when she heard the vehicles. At first, it was just a distant rumble of powerful engines, but it quickly grew louder. Maria looked up from her work to see an extraordinary sight. 4 black SUVs, the expensive kind with tinted windows and chrome details that gleamed even in the pale morning light, turning onto her street in a precise convoy. They moved with an almost military coordination, and Maria felt her heart begin to race. Her first thought was for Daniel. Had something gone wrong? Was this immigration enforcement? Child Protective Services coming with excessive force? Some threat she hadn't anticipated? The SUVs pulled up directly in front of her cart, forming a semicircle that blocked the street. Maria's hands trembled as she wiped them on her apron, her mind racing through possibilities. The car doors opened in unison, and several people emerged. But these weren't government agents or police officers. They were wearing business suits, carrying briefcases and tablets, their body language professional, but not threatening. From the lead vehicle, a tall man in his 60s stepped out, distinguished-looking with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He walked directly toward Maria with purposeful strides, a warm smile on his face. "Ms. Rodriguez?" "Maria Rodriguez?" he asked, extending his hand. Maria nodded, too confused to speak, automatically shaking his hand. "My name is Richard Chen." I'm the CEO of Horizon Foundation, a philanthropic organization based in California. I apologize for the dramatic entrance. My security team insists on the convoy when I travel, but I've come a very long way to meet you. Richard chin gestured to the woman beside him, who stepped forward with a warm smile. This is Dr. Sarah Williams, our Director of Community Initiatives, and behind me are members of our assessment and legal teams. May we speak with you for a few minutes? I promise we're not here to cause any trouble. Quite the opposite, in fact. Maria, still bewildered, glanced at the clock on her cart. Her morning customers would begin arriving soon. As if reading her thoughts, one of the team members spoke up. We've taken the liberty of arranging for temporary coverage. There's a food truck 3 blocks away ready to serve your usual location for the morning if you'll allow them. Your customers won't go hungry, I promise. This level of organization should have been alarming, but something about Richard Chen's demeanor put Maria at ease. She agreed, and within moments, folding chairs and a small table had been produced from one of the SUVs, creating an impromptu meeting space on the sidewalk. As they sat, Dr. Williams began. Mr. Chen saw your story about Daniel. It touched him deeply because he was also a foster child who struggled in the system. He's built his career and his foundation on the belief that compassionate individuals like yourself shouldn't have to shoulder the burden of social problems alone. Richard Chen took over, leaning forward intently. Maria, what you've done for Daniel is beautiful. But in researching your story, we learned about your own situation, the medical debt from your late husband's illness, the struggles to make ends meet, the sacrifices you've made to ensure your daughter can finish her education. You give so much to your community, asking for nothing in return. Our foundation would like to change that. He opened the briefcase one of his assistants had placed before him, removing several folders. First, we'd like to pay off your medical debt in its entirety. Second, we want to establish a full scholarship fund for your daughter, covering not just her remaining tuition but also living expenses, so she can focus entirely on her studies. Third, we'd like to help you expand your business. Not just a cart, but a proper restaurant if that's what you want, or a food truck, or multiple carts with employees. Whatever vision you have for Maria's Kitchen, yes, that's what we're calling it. We want to help you realize it. Maria sat in stunned silence as Richard Chen continued, his enthusiasm growing with each word. But that's not all. Daniel's story has highlighted a critical gap in services for at-risk youth in this city. Our foundation wants to establish a comprehensive program here, a safe housing facility, educational support, job training, mental health services, specifically designed for teenagers who've fallen through the cracks like Daniel did. And we want you to be involved in its development and oversight. Dr. Williams interjected, pulling out her tablet to show Maria architectural renderings. We're calling it the Maria's House Project. It would be a residential facility that doesn't feel institutional. More like a large home with individual rooms, communal spaces, on-site counselors, tutors, and vocational training areas. We'd work with Thomas Blackwell and others in the community who've already expressed interest in helping. The goal is to create a place where kids like Daniel can feel safe, supported, and valued while they work toward independence or family reunification, whatever is appropriate for their individual circumstances. Maria's eyes welled with tears as she looked at the renderings. The building looked warm and inviting, nothing like the cold institutional facilities Daniel had described from his time in foster care. There were art studios, a library, a full kitchen, gardens, and workshop spaces. I don't understand, Maria whispered. Why me? I'm just a woman with a food cart. I'm not a social worker or a trained professional. I don't have a college degree or any special qualifications. Richard Chen reached across the table and gently covered her hand with his. Maria, the most important qualification is the one you demonstrate every single day. You see people, truly see them, and you treat them with dignity. You don't help Daniel because you expect recognition or reward. You help him because he's a child who needs help and you have the capacity to provide it. That's exactly the kind of wisdom and compassion we need guiding this project. He leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming more serious. I won't lie to you, this will be a lot of work. We have teams of professionals who will handle the technical aspects, the legal requirements, the licensing, the construction, the hiring of qualified staff. But we need someone who understands this community, who has earned their trust, to be the heart of the operation. We need your input on everything from the meals served to the house rules to the hiring criteria for staff. As the morning sun rose higher, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Daniel came running around the corner, alarmed by the sight of the SUVs. When he spotted Maria safe and sound, surrounded by well-dressed strangers, his confusion was evident. Maria stood and called him over, and as he approached cautiously, she introduced him to Richard Chun and explained what was happening. The look on Daniel's face as he learned about the plans for Maria's house, a place where kids like him could find safety and support, was something Maria would treasure forever. Tears streamed down the boy's cheeks as the reality sank in. He wasn't just going to be helped. He was going to be part of something that would help countless others like him. In the weeks that followed, Maria's life transformed in ways she never could have imagined. The medical debt that had hung over her like a dark cloud for years vanished overnight. Her daughter Carmen cried tears of joy when she learned she could focus entirely on her studies without working 2 part-time jobs. Maria signed the papers to lease a small storefront 2 blocks from her cart location, the beginning of Maria's Kitchen, a proper restaurant that would employ others from the community who needed a chance. Daniel moved into a transitional home with a carefully vetted foster family while Maria's house was being built, a process expected to take 18 months. He started therapy to process his trauma, enrolled in school, and began his mentorship with Thomas Blackwell, discovering a genuine passion for automotive work that gave him direction and hope for the first time in years. The day the foundation broke ground on Maria's house, the entire neighborhood turned out for the ceremony. Maria stood at the microphone, looking out at the crowd of familiar faces, her customers, her friends, her community, and spoke from her heart. I didn't feed Daniel for recognition or reward. I fed him because he was hungry, because he was a child who deserved kindness. But what I've learned through all of this is that small acts of compassion can ripple outward in ways we never expect. We can't solve every problem, but we can help one person at a time. And when we do that, when we all do that, we change the world. As applause erupted and Daniel stood beside her, no longer the frightened, hungry boy she'd first spotted by the dumpster, but a young man with purpose and hope, Maria understood that this was just the beginning. For SUVs had pulled up to her cart one ordinary morning, but they'd brought with them the extraordinary reminder that goodness begets goodness, that compassion compounds, and that sometimes feeding one hungry child can nourish an entire community's soul.